Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining our session today. It's kind of hard to believe that Education Month is almost over, September coming to a quick end here. We appreciate you taking some time to be with us today, and we have an interesting panel that we've assembled. And so let's just go ahead and introduce ourselves, and then we'll get right into it. So, Milena, do you want to kick off the introductions, please?
Yes, sure. I would like to thank the BCI and Education Month 2021 for the opportunity to share our knowledge and insights, as well as to extend my gratitude to the co-founders of the Resilience Think Tank for coming together, giving back to our industry, and making this possible. We would like to make today's session as interactive as possible, and we are doing this for you. So feel free to post comments, questions, and any concerns that you may have on the topic. We will go through these as the session progresses. With great honor, I would like to introduce to you Lisa Jones. Lisa has over 13 years promoting resiliency and elevating contingency planning visibility. She has led comprehensive programs in healthcare, education, and manufacturing. Lisa is the new president of the BCI's USA chapter and leads diversity and inclusion initiatives with a mission to foster a culture of inclusion, community, and collaboration. Lisa's goal is to ensure organizations recognize the value business continuity professionals provide. Over to you, Lisa.
Hi, everyone. I would like to introduce you to Milena. Milena specializes in business continuity, crisis management, and operational resilience. She's currently BCM lead at a global financial services firm based in London, where she's looking after continuity and resiliency for over 50 offices and 6,000 staff. Raised in a close proximity to a nuclear power plant, Milena became aware of the value of monthly drills as a child. She is also on the committee for the BCI Women in Resilience Group and the network of women for her organization. And pass it over to Mark.
All right, thank you, Lisa. I'm really pleased to be here with all of you, but I'm especially pleased to introduce my friend Ashley Goosman. Ashley is the Business Continuity and Crisis Management Manager for Liberty Mutual Insurance. She has over 18 years of very relevant experience, kind of coming out of September 11th. So it's a very interesting backstory if you ever get a chance to hear it. She's a frequent conference speaker, a blogger. She has her own website that's dedicated to disaster resilience. That's called disasterempire.com. And Ashley, I'm glad that you could be part of this today.
Great, thank you, Mark. And I have the great honor of introducing Mark, our moderator today. Mark is a senior risk and resilience consultant based in the Toronto, Canada area. He runs his own boutique consulting practice and has clients in the US, Canada, the Caribbean, and Europe. He has over 20 years of industry experience and is the host of a new podcast called The Resilience Journey. Mark is a frequent conference speaker, blogger, and webinar guest. And then hand it back over to you, Mark.
Yeah, so before we get too deep into this today, I just want to say, echo what Milena said a few minutes ago. We want this interactive. We want to hear from you. So use the chat function to tell us where you're joining from. We'd like to hear about that. And yeah, so we do want this to be interactive. We want to get your comments as we go through this. So how did we get here? Well, not only do we have people on the call from Philadelphia, Boston, London, and Toronto, but I mean, how did we logically get here? Well, back in April, I was fortunate enough to win the BCI Award for Continuity and Resilience Consultant. And I said at that time that I wanted to give back. I wanted to give back to the BCI. I want to give back to our industry, and I want to give back to our colleagues. And so I had been hearing a lot from a lot of different people were struggling, that they were going through a situation where they found themselves in uncertain times. They were struggling maybe because their organization didn't understand the value that they brought to the table, and they just didn't know how to articulate that value. And so I decided I was going to reach out to some people that I thought were pretty interesting. And so I reached out to some folks and I said, hey, look, would you help me put together, I don't know, a peer group, and we can talk about ways that we can articulate value. How can we help our colleagues? And all it took was one email to 5 different people, and I got 5 yeses. And they all came back and said, yeah, we want to help with this. And coming out of that, we were able to publish some articles about it. Now we're doing this webinar as part of the commitment to the BCI to give back on this. We're just thrilled to death to be able to do this. But it grew into a little bit more, because as we talked, as we started to learn more about each other and to get to know each other, we realized, man, we're learning a lot from each other. So we thought it would be a good idea to kind of make this a permanent thing. And so we formed the Resilience Think Tank. And the idea here is that we're here to provide guidance and research on the risk and resilience industry. We want to help people. We want to help mentor young professionals. We want to talk to people about complex issues and provide some of that guidance. So before we get too deep into the specific topic of what we're going to talk about, let me just throw it out to my friends here, Lisa and Milena and Ashley. What was it about this whole thing that just sounded like a good idea to you and made you want to be part of it?
So I'll start. It was an intriguing opportunity to really discuss what we all think in our head. You know, as professionals, particularly when we are in our organizations, we're a team of 1, maybe 2. So how do you ensure that what you're doing is right without, you know, or feel like you're not crazy from a BCP standpoint? So having this opportunity to share our thoughts, find and learn was the thing that really drew me to this group.
Good, thanks. Lisa, Ashley, and Milena, anything else you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, I can add, Lisa, you said it really well. And, you know, I think it was, for me, really interesting to be able to connect with a group of people who are international in scope as well and come from such different backgrounds. I really found it to be a fabulous opportunity, and already through the process, I'm learning so much in talking with all of you, and really excited to be able to share to our peers out there in the industry. And I'm really looking forward to the future articles and white papers that we may create.
Yeah, and I have to point out, in addition to the 4 of us on the call today, the other 2 co-founders of the think tank are James Green and Andreas Bryant. We're thrilled to have them to be part of us. It's a fun group. It's very, very interesting. And like Ashley said, I look forward to what's going to come next. Part of what we've done already is a couple of articles, one for the BCI and another for an organization in the US called Preparedx. And we were able to, so in this first one, Lisa and Milena wrote an article talking about articulating value, and that's the BCI article. And then 2 other members of the team, Ashley and Andreas, wrote a 2-part article for Preparedx that talks about business continuity and operational resilience. Now, I bring these articles up, first of all, as a resource for all of you to go check them out, but also because I'm going to be referencing these articles as we go through, and I want to dig a little bit deeper with the team here to get some insight. So getting to the heart of this now, we want to talk about, well, what is value? And Lisa and Milena, you wrote the article for the BCI, and one of the things that you talk about in that article is taking time to review the program strategies, whether they're tactical or operational, to make sure that they're adding value. Can you kind of explain to the audience what that means and maybe give some practical examples of what kind of elements you're talking about and what some of the things might be that we might want to look at changing to make sure it adds value?
Melina, I'll punt to you first.
Thanks. It is definitely a great question. And if you haven't had a chance to view the article, just go into the BCI website and download it. It's really great. But going back to the point, we want to mention that business continuity is a key discipline that sits at the heart of building and improving resilience of our organizations. And of course, this year's theme for Education Month is embedding business continuity for a more resilient future. When we talk about resilience, we should also talk about agile leadership. This discipline requires direction, commitment, and alignment. And what do I mean by direction? We should ask ourselves, why are we doing this? What is the purpose of resilience within our organization? Do we have enough commitment and ownership from our leadership? It is all about empowerment, awareness, and expertise, and accountable executives. We should ask ourselves, are we aligned to the activities across boundaries, borders, across silos in the organization? Are we aligned to its goals and objectives, to its vision and culture? There is a lot more to resilience, and business continuity professionals may not be expert in every single discipline. But what we have is the combined knowledge and relationship, which can help us bridge gaps, remove silos, and enable strategic choices, informed decisions at every level of the organization. I strongly believe that we should empower our people, regardless of their level in the organization. And continuity and resilience should be everyone's responsibility. It definitely starts with commitment and awareness. And obviously, in order to create a resilient world, we need resilient people who can help us with this vision to strengthen and manage the operational resilience and continuity of their organization too. Over to you, Lisa.
That was great, Melina. And I would just like to add, when we're looking at our programs, I think COVID really forced us to take a deeper look into our programs. More organizations had to pivot from what they considered to be their critical functions and processes. And the traditional way of recovery was, going to a hot site, relocating to alternate locations. And we've learned through COVID and through the pandemic that was just not the case. We were not going to alternate locations. Instead, we were sheltering in place, literally, in many organizations or many offices within people's houses. If you look at the food industry and restaurants, their business was they received most of their revenue was from people sitting at the bar and people coming into a restaurant. We couldn't do that anymore. So when we should take this opportunity to say, okay, those things that we thought that were important, are they still important? Those 50-page documents that we use, particularly for auditing and assessment, is it really working for us when it's time to recover? Continuing to be curious about our organization. What is our true moneymaker? And what is our true mission of our organization? When we look at those things, this is how we can, bring some new life into our program. So those are just some of the things that we can add value to, because we have that 40-foot high view of our organization.
I like that, and you're right. We already have that view, and it's just time to align it a little bit more. We're going to talk a little bit more about aligning in just a second. Now, the person behind the scenes here today from the BCI is our new friend, Gabriella. So let me just ask her, Gabriella, do we have any questions at this point yet?
Thank you, Mark. No, so far we haven't got any questions, but we do encourage people to pop in their questions for you, and I will probably be reading them out loud for you when the time comes.
Yeah, at the end of every slide, I'm going to look to you, and you can to jump in there for sure. Now, perfect segue from what we were just talking about, aligning to the organization, and this is for all of you. And Ashley, I'll start with you. We were talking about business continuity not being a one-size-fits-all solution. Things that you did at one company might not work somewhere else, and so it's really important that the program is aligned to what the priorities are of the organization. So I don't know, maybe you can talk about maybe some thought-provoking questions that our colleagues could be asking to begin to provide some thought leadership around this, or just give some examples of where people might look to make sure that they can align the program with the true needs of the organization.
Thanks, Mark. Yeah, I think this is really an important point. I think we all do our learning. Some of us go for certifications or otherwise you learn a certain way of doing business continuity. Really what I found from organization to organization is that you can't do it the same. It just doesn't work. And a big part of that is really understanding the culture of the business that you're working with and working in. Because it's really what I've found in my experience, is things that I've done successfully, even with one part of a business, is not always as successful with the other part. And that's where really learning the culture of the organization is so vital. And for that, what I mean is working with, one group, you really need to understand their needs and what's going to be most successful. And this is part of the value of business continuity, is really designing your product, our program, to the needs of that organization. And it seems really simplistic to say that, but in actuality, I find that it isn't. So one of the mistakes that I've seen colleagues make is really try to take what worked at one place and make it, fit in at another. So round peg, square hole. That's really, as practitioners, that's where we bring our value and our success is really helping with those different organizations and working with them to find out what is the most important and then working through that. And then, so I wanted to see if Milena or Lisa, if you had any additional adds to that.
I would just add that, and I agree with you, Ashley, 100% that, it has to fit your organization. I think the thing that as professionals we need to remember is that our fundamentals are still fundamental. BIAs are still important. Understanding dependencies are still important. What does change is how it's reported or what is understood by your organization and what the emphasis is on your organization. There are some organizations that may be risk averse. So BIA would be the pinnacle thing for you to focus on. What are those gaps? What are those things that could cause harm to your organization? Or your organization may be a very aggressive company that will say, we'll worry about that. We'll shake it out in the end. So your important thing may be to make sure we have a checklist or those things, or just those recovery processes in place that can, particularly if a company is not regulated, they have a more different view on what is considered business continuity and what is more important. So, staying true to the fundamentals are very important. How you use those fundamentals and use that for your organization will be different.
Yeah, definitely great points. It just makes me think about, all those 25-page long BIAs and plans that we once had or perhaps still use. And probably the question now is to ask ourselves, do we really need all of these pages? Do they communicate to us during a major disruption? Do we need to review them, just once a year, or do we need to review them more often? Do we have the technology in place to display that data? And of course, the main question here is, do we still have the right people involved in our crisis and incident management teams? I know that a lot of organizations have a couple of different teams that manage incidents, but sometimes that lies within the business continuity or resilience manager job description. So it's all about asking those important questions and making sure that you're still relevant, making sure that you communicate the right things to management, and you ask yourself, do I understand the business and key services? Because if I don't, how can I learn? Can I shadow the business? Can I learn from the peers in my industry? Can I communicate with a similar language to how, let's say, the cyber or even info security team communicates to our senior execs? Can we align with that? So this is a great time to actually ask yourself these questions, and I think COVID is a great enabler to make us, think and reshape our program, and perhaps, think more tactically and operationally going forward.
And I think
I like
Melania,
what you all said. Oh, go ahead, Ashley. You go.
sorry, Mark. I just think that's
That's all right.
a great point as you were talking about, the kind of reams of paper and many page documents that we've, I think, all created in the past. And that just made me think, in my own organization over the last few years, our BIA report went from being a 60 to 100 page Word document. We started using PowerPoint dashboards to provide the BIA results, and we have had such a positive response from our senior leadership, and it resonated so much more with them. So that just made me think of it, and I wanted to jump in and add that as an additional example.
I'm glad you said that, because I know when you and I spoke as part of the interview I did with you, I think you said to me, there was one instance where you found people weren't even using the business continuity plans. They were just going to the BIA output directly.
Correct.
Right. And so when you see something like that happen in your organization, that's a really good sign that the plans, the documents that you have in place there aren't relevant. They're not adding value. And I think we have to have enough confidence within ourselves to say, look, I know I'm bringing value to the organization. Even if the organization doesn't see it, I know it's there. And so what we have to do is we have to work collaboratively with the business to say, look, I noticed when we had this incident, you didn't even refer to the plan. Don't be afraid to ask it. Why not? What do we need to do differently? How do we need to make this better? All right. Gabriella?
Yes, Mark, thank you. I'm still here. No questions yet. Come on, people, write down your questions and let's get this session really interactive.
So I have to reference something. I was listening to a preacher one time, and he said the phrase, "I'm preaching way too good for none of you to be saying amen." And so listen, I'm going to just say this. This is too good for you not to be asking questions. So come on, let's get into it. Let's make this interactive. All right, Ashley and Lisa, I'll come to you first on this. We talk about future-proofing the role and future-proofing our programs. And to do that, shifting to embrace more of a cross-domain process. And to kind of look maybe into some other areas that traditionally business continuity programs didn't address before. So in a post-COVID world, we see a lot more vulnerabilities to things like cyber attacks for people working from home, or power outages and things like that. So give us some practical examples, whether it's related to operational resilience or some other threat area, where our colleagues should be learning as much as possible to broaden their horizons and be in a position to add more value, not only to future-proof their role, but to future-proof the program. So Lisa, we'll start with you.
Sure. For this is we talked about this before. This is definitely a heavy question and kind of existential in nature. I think one of the things about this is that we as professionals tend to take on the role of that we try to know everything, and at this point I've decided I can't know everything. So it's so important that we rely on other departments, other organizations to help for this cross-domain function process of future-proofing our strategies. So whether you collaborate with your cyber resilience person within your organization, or have conversations with your incident managers to see, to help tease out those dependencies. I think that's very important. We see that there is a huge emphasis right now on supply chain and vendor third-party risk. And those are things that I don't think we truly took into account. We knew that was there and we knew that we would deal with it, but now, you know, those things have literally brought us to our knees in many different ways. So, you know, broadening your horizon on those aspects and working with those things that could help us mitigate instead of, so we're not reactionary. I think those things are helpful. Ashley.
Yeah, I think those are great points, especially about working with our, you know, suppliers and our third-party vendors. I'll add on to that just a few other different ways. One of the experiences that I've had during COVID in working within my organization, and I've talked to colleagues who experienced the same, is that as we were going through the COVID response and we started working with the business units around their plans, one of the responses that we got from them was that, hey, you know, I can recover. We were going back and validating their RTOs, and they were saying, well, this is all great, I can do this, but, you know, really, I can't recover. I can't come back unless we have members of teams and other functions or other processes are recovering as well. So we really, although we've always looked, I think, at interdependencies in our field, what I'm seeing is really less of that siloing, if you will, in terms of planning for specific functions, but really bringing up and augmenting that interdependency feature and really looking across domains, so across the organization. And that's what's been so interesting to me in terms of the trending of operational resilience and using that viewpoint, is looking at providing a service, you know, from the beginning point to the end point. And in talking to leadership, that resonates so much more with them. They understand the term resilience. They understand operational resilience as a concept, I think, so much more than they do at times business continuity and all the jargon that we have there. So I think that's another thing to really look at. And then secondarily, in the crisis response area, one of the things in working, especially within large organizations, there can be a tendency to break off or silo even within crisis response teams and have multiple of them. And although ICS has worked really well in many organizations, what I've seen is kind of a gradual breaking away from that. So finding the right structure to bring those teams back together, again, looking at the response, not just through a specific lens, whether it's DR or cybersecurity, or, you know, business continuity with natural disaster and facility impacts, but looking really across the organization and determining how we can be resilient.
Yeah, I like that. Gamma, over to you.
Yes, so people are finally warming up, and we've got a few questions coming in. The first one would be, have you been met with a culture of we have recovered well in the past from wide-scale events, so we don't need to invest in a new process? If so, I have found that bringing to their attention scenarios that only affect their business in isolation is an area that generally gauges greater focus instead of just the black swan events. What are your thoughts on this?
We love questions about culture because we understand that understanding the culture of the organization is a huge key to aligning the program with the organization and demonstrating values, having your efforts be perceived as valuable. So yeah, let's start with, I'll just throw it out there. Who wants to address the question about, well, you know, we've been fine so far. Why do we need to keep doing this? Does anybody want to jump on that one?
Yeah, I can give
All
it
right.
a try first, Mark.
Okay.
So I hate to say it, but it's very interesting that whenever an incident happens, we can obviously almost immediately evidence all the great work we've done we don't really want for those incidents to happen. And we have plenty of examples out there happening on daily and even weekly, basis of what's going on around the world. There's so many disruptions, so many incidents that we can bring as case studies and tell our organization, look what happened to this organization. That they've been in the industry for 200 years, and they have the best crisis management team and they have the best investments, but still they were affected. What did they do wrong? Well, they didn't have timely information, or perhaps they didn't consult their business continuity professionals or resilient professionals in their organization. Maybe they were the last to know. I've heard so many times from different professionals that they were never consulted during the pandemic, or if an incident happened, they weren't informed in time. So it's very important to make sure that you are aware of what's happening in your organization, that you build those relationships so you can be informed, that you have those mechanisms and processes behind, that you can be triggered as quickly as possible so you can help your organization. So yes, there are plenty of evidence out there and case studies that you can use to evidence your management.
Yeah, and I would just build on.
I like that.
Yeah, I would just build on that to say that when it does come to culture, again, making it fit your culture is what's going to work. So yes, there are organizations that if you give them some kind of black swan type of event, they'll look at you sideways and say, I'm not doing it. I don't want to be involved. So making it important to them is really what is going to keep them engaged. We may not, from an organization on the East Coast, we may not worry about earthquakes, really, truly, earthquakes or wildfires, but hurricanes are very important to us. So keep it as simple as a hurricane event, or, losing power is something that can and has happened to many organizations. And particularly now with everyone working from home, power is a big thing. So, using those type of events to really, engage people and keep them interested and keep them aware of your program are those things that you do want to, focus on. Maybe a protest in your area may not be the thing, or civil unrest may not be a thing, but like I said, yeah, those localized things are something that can happen. Just look at the news in your area and pull something from that. That can have an effect on your business.
I think Lisa and Melania, those are both great points, and I'll kind of summarize into one, find out what's important and the risks are for your organization, and then find out from the executives, right, what keeps them up at night. That really does matter. And if you can take that information, exactly as you guys were saying, and put that into an exercise or a series of exercise scenarios, I think that really helps to get them to understand if they've been somewhat resistant, or if they're not as interested, to really make it real for them and bring it home as to why this work is so important, why we're trying to prepare and be as resilient as we can when things happen.
I'm going to kind of summarize all of that and talk about the importance of the relationship between the resilience team, could be a team of one, and the risk management team. Risk and resilience are two sides of the same coin, and the relationship between those two is super critical. So when you start talking about people providing resistance or pushback because they don't think we need to be worried about resilience or business continuity for some black swan event, I wouldn't worry about the black swan events. Where I would focus initially would be on, well, what's risk saying? What does our horizon scan look like? What does our threat risk assessment tell us we need to be worried about? And then from a resilience standpoint, the resilience measures that we put in place become the mitigation plan for the risk management process. So to me, they're hand in hand, part and parcel, two sides of the same coin, however you want to say it. And I think that's how you kind of embrace that. I think that ties into my next slide, so I'm going to jump to it. But Gabriella, I'll come back to you in a minute for any other questions that came in. We were just talking about culture and the relationships between resilience and risk and so forth. And one of the things, this is for all of you, we were talking about in your article, you talked about having a 360-degree view of the organization. We tend to look at things just sort of, well, how does it affect our business, rather than, well, what are all of the stakeholders here, and what's a holistic view of the organization? And we talk a lot about connecting dots and so forth, and I know that there's a lot of data here. But what are you suggesting to our colleagues here in order to build this type of model where we have a 360-degree view? What does that look like? Milena, let's start with you.
Thanks, Mark. I guess it's definitely challenging to evidence all the amazing things we have achieved and done for our profession and our organization, but it's probably time to start tracking these and show our value to our employers and to the rest of the teams that we work with. We should remember that we are enablers and that we are the bridge that connects all teams and expose all those gaps that the organization has. What can we do differently? We should know how to rapidly assess our organization. We should make sure we get to the point, and we should aim to actively be involved in the recovery of our organization's operations. We should be relevant as well, and we should make sure that our actions are tied to the risks raised by the organization. We should definitely gain followers, gain momentum, gain influence. End of the day, we should make what we do, in the best possible way, but for the sake of our organization. We should be their partner, and this should help us understand the context of the information that we collect and gather throughout the year. We should perhaps write our plans in a better way. And I'll just stop here and pass it to Lisa or Ashley.
Ashley, did you want to jump in?
Sure. I look at this in a variety of ways, beyond the operational resilience view that I talked about earlier, which I think is very helpful. I think two other aspects that I would say to look at this is really another thing that we touched on earlier. I think no longer as business continuity practitioners can we just look at our organization. I think we need to be very aware of the risks and the threats that are out there in the world that could impact the organization. So really looking at how the outside could impact in, which again, I think we've always done, but we need to augment that. And I think the other piece is definitely with the supply chain and the third-party vendor risks. That is an increasingly, and I don't know about your organizations, Lisa and Milena, but definitely within the one I'm working for now, it's a huge concern because we have seen, offshoring more and more of activities, to third parties, and especially in today's climate, it's very concerning. So those are all things that I would definitely want to be looking at. And this really helps you when you're doing this and bringing this back to your organization and making those connections with the right groups. And I think another way to look at this is, do we work with certain people, but really looking at maybe working with parts of the organization and partnering in ways that either we haven't done before or we haven't at all, whether that's enterprise risk or whether that's even procurement. I've had several experiences over the last few months of really seeing the value of having procurement at the table. Obviously the planning piece is important, but even to the crisis response level. Here in the US, we had what they're calling in Texas the Great Freeze back in February. And although we had plans in place, we found out, a generator on site was not full. It was not topped off, and that had ramifications, and we were not able to use the vendor that we typically would have. And so we really had to partner with our procurement department to find some within partners in the organization to really find another vendor to work with on that. And then with Hurricane Ida as well, coming up and hitting the Gulf Coast, then coming up the Northeast, Eastern Seaboard. After that is another area that we really had to partner very closely with our procurement group to have an understanding of where resources might be needed after, and were needed after that event. So I think that's why I'm really urging us as part of this, and I think we're all saying this within this group, is that, you know, we can no longer just be laser focused on one area or one issue, but it really makes sense for us to broaden our horizons in the work that we're doing today. And that's going to bring that value to their table, and I think really help our organizations as a whole.
Yep. Lisa, anything to add on that, or?
No, I'll hold my peace on that. But no, all these things were just to summarize was all the things that I was also wanted to just interject.
A couple of nuggets I'll call out here was that, you know, gaining influence and being that partner, be that trusted partner, and we're going to talk about that in the next slide a little bit more. Gabriella, questions?
Yes, so we've got more of a comment and a question altogether. So one of the challenges I'm having is being told to add extra value to future-proof role when it's difficult, because in a big organization, the remit is limited, because if we do, it steps on others' toes. Often involves forcing ourselves to get involved when we would not. And then this is more like a question, are others on here finding that they have to do this to future-proof their role? Would you have any advice on this?
Sure. Who would like to take that?
I think I'll go. When we're talking about stepping on others' toes, that can be a tough situation. The easiest, not the easiest thing, but the best thing that we can do is to ensure that our allies are championing our role within the organization. I mean, if we need our sponsors to really have that buy-in to help us push those initiatives along. And there will be people, regardless of how well you do or how well the program is performed or perceived, we will always have those people who just don't want to be involved, don't want to give their opinion, don't want to, you know, consider this as another task that's been added to their list of things that they have to do. And we just need to understand that and continue to, you know, push forward with what our initiative is, and document it. I mean, at certain points, in the end, there will be some responsibility, and the more you can document it, that, you know, we did reach out, we tried to engage, and this didn't happen. It's not necessarily pointing fingers, but it's ensuring that, okay, if this is not the person, then what other team should I work with? Who should I pivot to? And this is why we need our champion and our allies to help us move things forward.
Yep. Well, I interviewed James Green, one of our co-founders, and he's watching. Hey, James, how you doing? You know, one of the things he said was it's really critical for resilience professionals to have allies in the organization, and if you don't, you're going to fail, because you can't do this alone. You have to build those relationships, and that takes time. I've been in situations where I have tried to execute, you know, a study to show how resilient our key suppliers were for a client that I was working with. And when I spoke with the procurement team, they got really offended, and they didn't want to talk to me about it. They felt like I was stepping on their toes. And so I needed to back that up a little bit, slow it down, and start to build relationships and explain what I was trying to do. So it can be difficult. We're not saying it's easy, but we're saying it is definitely necessary. So let me jump to this. This is kind of a lightning round question, if you will. So I'll throw this out at you. There's some key points here that we need to remember. We can lead through change. We can demonstrate our value during disruption and uncertainty and difficult times. And there's a good opportunity there. We can challenge the status quo, question our assumptions, make sure we engage to get that strong leadership, be that trusted partner, and build those relationships. So I'll throw it out to the audience. What do you see here as being most important to you? Where are you struggling? and then I'll throw it out to the panelists, starting, I guess, with Ashley. What jumps out here as a key point to you?
Today, the one that's jumping out to me is to question your assumptions. And so I think this is a good reminder for all of us, because I think sometimes we get used to doing things in a certain way and we feel like it's working well. And even though we know there are things that we can improve, it's the way we've always done it and it makes sense to us. So I think sometimes we have to step back and say, is it still working for our company? Is it still working for the business? Because that is really what continues to drive me. And that means that you have to ask questions. And Mark and others, what you said about building relationships is so key, because you can't be concerned, right, about going out and getting reflections and getting feedback from the business. And it's not that we can always do 100% of what they want, in my experience, but usually you can get 80 to 90%. So that's very important here. I think being a trusted partner is jumping out for me as well, and others, you know, Lisa and Melania and Mark, I think you've touched on this as well, is being that partner. And I think that's key. You know, leadership does mean partnering. And when you're having some of those challenging relationships, you've all talked about ways in which you work to overcome that. And I think understanding, you know, sometimes you're not going to get 100% of the participation that you want, but maybe you'll get that 80 or that 90, and that's good. If you're having the majority of your partners come along with you on this journey, I think you are going to be successful. And then I'm very tenacious, so I continue to try to work with those, or finding a way to work with those. And I think one of the key aspects here is, if you're finding a challenging partnership is occurring, is trying to find what is of value to them, and trying to give that to them as much as you can. And so I'll turn it over to Lisa or Melania if you have any other thoughts on these as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Ashley. I think all of these are very important points. And I think what we need to focus on is we need to add value to the areas that need it most. We should not be afraid to ask the tough questions. We should not be afraid to prioritize, you know, what our, you know, key products and services and even our customers require of our organization. And we should definitely help our organization to focus on what matters the most. We should explain to them why we do what we do, make it, share it, and demonstrate the value and build those relationships. So all of these are very important reminders to us all. We should definitely be able to promote, speak up, sell what we do for our organization, and we should know how to negotiate, encourage, and influence others so we can speak the same language and, again, create resiliency. This is our goal. That's why we are here in this industry, and we have a lot to say. So don't be afraid to speak up.
A lot of soft skills there too, right? That's interesting. Lisa.
I was just going to add, the one that always jumps out to me is the strong leadership is crucial. And through my career, there's been different approaches for me of what I considered strong leadership. Versus it was, you know, when people say I'm a leader, I'm strong, doesn't necessarily mean you have to be aggressive. Strong leadership to me means sometimes you have to be that quiet leader, you know, getting those allies to speak for you in those organizations where you're not being heard. Sometimes it's not about you being that necessarily that leader for that position, but a strong leader knows when they're not being effective. And if I'm not being effective, you know, who can I count on, and who do I need to pull to help me get our program to where it needs to be? So being discerning about where your position is in your organization and how you can move the ball along, I think that has a lot to do when we're talking about being a strong leader.
Yeah, and be willing to reevaluate and step back and say, okay, you know what, this isn't working. I'm going to try a different approach. I think that kind of goes into questioning your assumptions. You have an assumption that doing a workshop a certain way, or holding meetings, or writing a plan a certain way, well, you know what, it worked everywhere else, so it's the right way to do it. Well, maybe it's not the right way to do it here. And again, it goes back to building that relationship, understanding the culture, and so forth. So we want to hear from you. We want to know where you're struggling. We have a few minutes left over. So, we talked about what's important to you. So, Gabriella, do we have anything else here in the chat that we should be aware of?
Thank you, Mark. Yes, actually, we've got a couple of more questions. One would be, do you have any tips for convincing executive to invest in BC software?
I don't hear anybody jumping in. I'm going to jump in. So I've been working with a company on the development of some business continuity software, and it's not ready to really talk about yet, but I can tell you this. One of the things that when you go through a project like that you always want to know is, well, why? Why would we do that? Why would we ever need a tool or a product or something like that? And one of the things that I've been focusing on is how difficult it is to do without business continuity software. A lot of times we're using things like Excel spreadsheets and Word documents, and actually, I think talked about using PowerPoint for dashboards and stuff like that, and I love that idea. But the problem is reporting coming out of a BIA, particularly if it's a large organization where you have 25, 30 departments you need to go out and talk to. Now you have to consolidate all that information into some kind of a meaningful report that isn't spread across spreadsheets that are too wide to print and too cumbersome to deal with. So for me, I think it would go to the value, again, there's the word again, the value of what we can do by having some kind of software in place, as opposed to using the old manual tools that are cumbersome, that our business partners don't like anyhow, and just gaining some efficiencies that way.
Yeah, I would add that we have to stop underselling the work that we have to do when we're doing things manually. We do so well at it that we sell it that, oh, well, you have a manual process that you use and it seems to be working fine. We need to stop underselling all the work that it takes to get that manual process to something that looks attainable. I mean, I have many friends who don't have software. Now, don't get me wrong, software is just another tool and it can be cumbersome if it's not set up correctly. But again, the amount of work that we put in using manual process, from PowerPoint to Excel to Word documents to SharePoints, and that's time consuming. And if that's the way that our organization wants us to spend our time, we'll never get to that point where we can be strategic. We'll never get to the point where we're spending too much time in the tactical part of the program and less in the strategic focus of the program. So even if you just sell it that way, that might be helpful. I mean, it doesn't work all the time, but we need to stop underselling the work that has to be done in an Excel spreadsheet.
And
Yeah,
Lisa,
like
you made a great point. From an executive's point of view, they're looking at the strategic, right? You really hit on it. They want to see what the strategic value is of that software. So as much as you can make that real for them, and I talked about dashboards earlier, and you folks know that I'm a big proponent of that. From an executive's point of view, the pinnacle to me would be able to provide them real-time data that gives them a strategic view of our business continuity data, or how they would respond to a crisis. Then I think you'll really see that interest, right? Because that goes to the overall organizational resilience that I think we're all striving for.
Good. Gabriella?
Thank you, Mark. Another question, it's in the same area as we discussed the previous one. What role do you think, if any, software solutions can or should play in the delivery of BCM programs moving forward, given the growing expectation of practitioners and the wider net of issues now covered by the role?
Yeah, I think building on what Lisa was saying as well, as much as you can for those who are invested and partnering with you on the program, one of the benefits that I see of using a software tool is to help to streamline, and I think others reference it taking away more of that manual work that we have to do. And as much as we can utilize a good software that will help us to do that, whether that's taking data feeds in from other parts of the organization that minimizes that data collection or that manual data touch, I think those have benefits as well. I think the other one is having that archival data. If you're able to do that in the software, that can be a bit harder to get at from a manual process, but if stored in software correctly, you can be able to do that compare and contrast, say as an example of the past BIA to the current BIA. That can be valuable data to your organization to look at how things have changed or how risks have increased or gaps have been closed. So I think all of those, again, as Lisa said, software is just a tool, but I think you can look at ways to really plus and accentuate our programs with use of tools in the right way, and that's really the value to me.
Good, Gabriella. I think let's try to squeeze in one more question if we have one.
Thank you, Ashley. Thank you, Mark. Well, actually, we've got a couple of comments. If you'd like me to bring those forward, I can do that now. So one of them
If
would
they're
be
positive, sure. If they're negative, no, we don't have time.
sure, definitely positive. So is it important for BC practitioners to partner with those responsible for operational resilience? As I think BC practitioners have a lot of data and information that can be used to support the mapping exercising for operational resilience. Also, it is important to ensure consistent naming conventions and business process definitions across both practices to prevent disalignment. I'm guessing this is something you all agree with.
Yeah, my quick answer is yes. Yeah, go ahead, Mark.
Good. So is that it for comments? Okay,
another comment, and this was related to the question of the stepping toes bit. So when others feel like you're stepping on their toes, you could state that business continuity, albeit its role, that we might occupy, but it's also a discipline that should be embedded in all areas of the business. You can sell the culture and not the process. Each business function should be encouraged to think about about what ifs and hows and where there's risk that have been identified. We are there as a resource to assist them, plug everything together and manage the risk through the solution.
I see everybody nodding and yeah, we agree with that. It just goes back to, again, building those relationships and working through it. Milena, explain to everyone how they can get in touch with us, and we'd love to hear what you're struggling with, or if you have any other questions, you can reach out to us. Milena will show you how to do that.
Thanks, Mark. You can find us on LinkedIn. If you search for the Resilience Think Tank, there is a barcode as well. So if you scan it with your phone, it will take you directly to the page. We're also on Twitter. We're just starting, but we would love to have you as our followers, and would also like to hear from you what is important to you, what is concerning to you, so we can, I guess, gather up and discuss all these important topics so we can come up with some solutions that can actually help you and bring more value to what you do or to your employer as well. So do check us out on LinkedIn and Twitter. We have all of our articles as well there and all of the great works that our colleagues have done in the industry. So we would like to hear from you for sure. Thank you.
All right. Parting words, Lisa. I'll start with you, Lisa. Last comments.
Just continue to be curious, continue to partner with your departments and get those allies behind you.
Love it. Ashley?
Hey, thank you. Thanks just everyone for joining today. I hope you found this helpful. We'd love to get your feedback. As Milena said, We want to work on topics that are of interest to everyone as we move forward to post-COVID time, which hopefully will come sooner rather than later. I just wanted to, again, thank you all for being here today.
All right, Milena, last word to you.
Thank you everyone for joining. Keep being resilient, keep asking the most difficult questions that you can from your organization, and don't be afraid to reshape your program. You're here to do a good job and build resilience. Don't be afraid to do it.
Good. Thank you all. Great insights from all of you. Thanks to everyone who spent the time with us, and we appreciate it. And thank you again to the BCI for allowing us to do this. So thanks everyone. We'll see you again soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.